Welcome everyone. So today we're going to be talking about a number one topic that is on everyone's mind, and giving a regulatory update on medical devices in the EU and UK, and just seeing what's happening in both those jurisdictions with all the regulatory changes that are happening. So my name is Vishal Thacker. So I'm the head of the UK approved body at BSI. I've been at BSI nearly 10 years, with working in various roles, such as a technical specialist with experience in active medical devices, working for the notified body, but then also as a regulatory lead, and then most recently as the head of the UK approved body, looking after the approved body for medical devices and IVDs. So today I'm joined with two outstanding panel members as well, which will cover three topics today. So we're going to be looking at the EU MDR with the updated transition timelines and implications of the EU regulation 2023/607. Similarly, we'll look at EU IVDR with the key changes under the EU regulation 2024/1860 and what they mean for diagnostic manufacturers. And then I'll come back to talk about the UK MDR 2002 in terms of the current status of the regulatory legislative reform, proposed timelines, and post-market surveillance requirements, which come into force next week. So I'd like to firstly give a bit of a housekeeping for today. This is a listen-only webinar, so your microphones and cameras will be disabled for the duration of the webinar. If you do have any questions, please do submit them via the question button on the top right-hand corner, and we will try to address them as part of the presentation. We do have a Q&A session at the end, so we'll try to get to all the questions. If you do have any technical issues, report them through the same question button, and we'll try and resolve them. After completing the post-event feedback survey, we will provide a link to the recording so you can listen back. Just as some information, this is a CPD accredited webinar, so you can request your certificate once you complete the survey. We do host various events throughout the year, so if you do want to learn more, please scan the QR code below. And just as a reminder, and I will talk about this later, but we do have Healthcare Week going on this week, and we still do have two great presentations on Thursday and Friday. So I want to introduce both of our panel members first. So I have Maddalena Pinci online, who will quickly just turn on her camera so you can see her, and she'll give a quick introduction to herself.
Thank you, Vishal. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maddalena Pinci, Associate Head of the Medical Devices Notified Body at BSI. I've been working BSI for around 6 years, and in my current role, I work along with the head of the notified body and Vishal as head of the UK approved body, responsible for regulatory oversight for medical devices, and this includes strategy, policy, procedures, and documentation to ensure compliance with the various legislative and designation requirements. So, as Vishal stated, I am going to walk you through the transitional timelines and the implications of the amended regulation EU 2023/607.
Great. Thank you, Maddalena. And just before Maddalena starts, I'd like to introduce our second panel member so we can just have a smooth transition after Maddalena completes her part. I have Sarah Fabi as well, who has joined today, and she'll give a quick introduction.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Fabi and I am IVD Regulatory Lead at BSI, where I am responsible for the regulatory strategy of the IVD notified body, and in particular I'm focusing on the compliance of high-risk devices. I've been working in BSI for the last almost 3 years, and I'm going to cover the IVDR updates today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'll pass over to Maddalena now.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start by saying what are the MDD and AMDD legacy devices that can be placed on the market at this point in time. So it depends where the directive certificate, if the certificate was valid or expired at the time of publication of the amended regulation EU 2023/607, which was the 20th of March. So those 2023, those legacy devices that are covered by a directive certificate that was valid on the 20th of March 2023, these devices can still be placed on the market provided that they are covered by an MDR application that was lodged by the 26th of May 2024, and provided that the manufacturer signed for them a written agreement under MDR with a notified body before by the 26th of September 2024. While in the cases of those legacy devices that are covered by a directive certificate that was expired before the 20th of March 2023, in order for the legacy devices to be placed on the market, they need to be covered by a derogation or exemption that has been granted by a competent authority before the 20th of March 2023, or they should be covered by an MDR application and a written agreement under MDR that has been signed before the expiry date of the directive certificate. So if that's the case, the legacy devices can be placed on the market up to the end of 2028. And the actual transitional timelines depends upon the classification of the legacy device under the MDR. So those legacy devices that are classified as Class 3 custom-made implantable devices under the MDR, they can be placed on the market up to the 26th of May 2026, while Class 3 devices and Class 2B implantable devices, which are not well-established technologies devices, they can be placed on the market up to the end of 2027, while at the end of 2028 is the end of the transitional timelines for all the other legacy devices. So all the other Class 2B devices, those that are classified as Class 2A under MDR, Class 1S sterile, and Class 1M with measurement function. But the end of 2028 is also the deadline, the end of the transitional timelines for those legacy devices that were self-declared under MDD, but which are up-classified under the MDR, and therefore they do need to work with a notified body for the first time. So this means that after the end of 2028, all devices shall be in compliance with the MDR. These timelines can be actually reached if the manufacturer and the legacy devices do meet some specific conditions that are stated in the amended Article 120 of the MDR. The first condition is the fact that there is continuous compliance with the directive, so MDD, AMDD, and this means also the fact that the notified body maintains the appropriate surveillance for the legacy devices. So the manufacturer should have asked the notified body to maintain the appropriate surveillance for those legacy devices they intend to keep placing on the market. The legacy devices shall not go through significant changes in design or intended purpose, and there should be no unacceptable risks for those devices. And also the manufacturer should have implemented a QMS system that is in compliance with MDR Article 10.9, and this is valid from the 26th of May last year. So we saw what are the conditions to be met. So what are the manufacturer's responsibilities? The manufacturers shall be able to demonstrate and document compliance with those requirements and conditions that we saw before they do place a legacy device on the market, so before applying the extended transitional period. The manufacturer needs to ensure that the QMS complies and is continuously in compliance with the requirements of the MDR as per Article 10.9, and this also includes those MDR requirements related to post-market surveillance, vigilance, or registration of economic operators and devices as per Article 123b. Manufacturers, as we mentioned, need to have requested the notified body to carry on to maintain the appropriate surveillance for the legacy devices, or have transferred the appropriate surveillance, the responsibilities for the appropriate surveillance from the directive notified body to the MDR notified body if they are different. And there is also the possibility for manufacturers to issue a self-declaration to declare compliance with the requirements of the amended Article 120, and this is covered by question 7 of the Q&A that the European Commission published to explain some activities or aspects of the amended Article 120. So as per the answer to question 7, manufacturers should be able to provide a self-declaration in order to confirm that the conditions for extensions are actually fulfilled, and they need to state what's the end date for the transitional period for the devices. It's also important to underline that there is another question, 9.1, in the Q&A that deals with what happens if the MDR application is withdrawn, or if the MDR written agreement between the manufacturer and the notified body is terminated. So if this happens, so if the manufacturer withdraws the MDR application or the written agreement is terminated, this means that the conditions of Article 123C.8 about the timelines are no longer fulfilled, and therefore the transition period ceases to apply. This is actually not true in cases where the manufacturer at the same time enters into a written agreement with another notified body. So basically, the manufacturer transfers the MDR application from one notified body to another one. So if that's the case, the transitional period continues to apply, provided that the manufacturer is not doing this because they realize that their device is going to be refused under MDR. So that's the exception. So if that's the point, so if the manufacturer wants to transfer the MDR application because they are feeling the device is going to be refused under MDR, the transitional period ceases to apply. So it's important to underline this, the fact that the MDR application can be transferred from one MDR notified body to another one, and this can be done even now, even after the 26th of September 2024 date. There are also other aspects that can have an impact on legacy devices. If the notified body refuses to issue an MDR certificate, or if the notified body restricts the scope of an MDR certificate or cancels the MDR certificate, then the written agreement under MDR in relation to those affected devices terminates, and this means that the related legacy devices can no longer be placed on the market. And the same applies if the manufacturer withdraws the MDR application, or if the manufacturer requests to cancel the MDR certificate or limit the scope of the MDR certificate. So even in this case, the written agreement for those specific devices is terminated, and therefore the related legacy devices cannot be placed on the market anymore. So what are our expectations as notified body? We expect that the manufacturer has implemented a process to demonstrate and document initial and continuous compliance with the requirements of the amended Article 120 before a legacy device is placed on the market. So does the manufacturer have a procedure in place to update or reissue the self-declaration if any aspects of those 5 conditions are impacted? And does the manufacturer have a process in place to implement further actions on the legacy devices? So, for example, suspending placing the legacy device on the market or ceasing to place a legacy device on the market based on various aspects that can impact the compliance with the conditions in the Article 120. So we said that there are 5 conditions that have to be met in order to keep placing the legacy devices on the market. And there are some factors that might impact on the possibility to comply with those conditions. For example, the condition to continue to be in compliance with the directive MDD-AMDD can be impacted by the outcomes of the notified body appropriate surveillance activities or actions that the notified body takes on the directive certificates. The fact that there shouldn't be significant changes in design or intended purpose can be impacted by the manufacturer change control process or by the assessment done by the manufacturer, by the notified body of the history of the changes introduced. The fact that there shouldn't be unacceptable risks can be impacted by the manufacturer's own activities in terms of post-market surveillance or surveillance conducted by the competent authorities, or again, actions by the notified body on the directive certificates. So, for example, suspension or scope restriction. The fact that the MDR, the QMS should be in compliance with the MDR requirements can be impacted by the outcomes of the audits conducted by the notified body, as well as by audits conducted by the competent authority in the context of market surveillance. And finally, the condition of having applied an MDR on time or having a written agreement signed on time, these can be impacted, as we just saw, by withdrawal of the MDR application by the manufacturer or refusal to issue the MDR certificate, cancellation of the MDR certificate, scope restriction. So we mentioned that even after the 26th of September 2024, there is the possibility to transfer the MDR application from one notified body called outgoing notified body to another notified body that is called incoming notified body. And one of the possible reasons for transferring the MDR application, as stated in the Q&A of the European Commission, is the fact that the current notified body maybe does not have capacity, while the new selected notified body have capacity, and BSI has currently no capacity limits, and we also published our lead times on our website. So we want to be transparent, we want the conformity assessment process to be predictable for manufacturers. So in our lead time document, we tell when we would be able to start looking at the technical documentation. So how can the transfer happen? Really, in a quick way, if a manufacturer wants to transfer the MDR application, they need to contact the new notified body. So there will be the need to sign off a transfer agreement between the manufacturer, potentially the outgoing notified body, and the incoming notified body. And there will be also some contracts to be signed off with the incoming notified body in order to cover the MDR conformity assessment activities and the appropriate surveillance for the legacy devices. And then the transfer is complete. So in conclusion, what are some important things to remember? Manufacturers are the ones responsible for placing legacy devices on the market lawfully. So you need to ensure that the devices meet the conditions of the amended regulation before placing legacy devices on the market. You need to also make sure that you asked your notified body to continue the appropriate surveillance for your legacy devices. And you need to have process in place in order to stop placing on the market legacy devices that do not satisfy those conditions. Remember about the potential impacts on the MDR application or written agreement. So if there is the manufacturer withdraws the MDR application, or if the written agreement under MDR is terminated, the transitional period ceases to apply, with the exception of the possibility to transfer the MDR application to another notified body under certain conditions. And finally, do not delay or postpone your MDR plan. Submit your technical documentation as per the submission plan that you have agreed with your notified body. And you could also refer to the European Commission dashboard that I linked here to have an idea about what's the average time required to obtain an MDR certificate. So thank you very much. I am now leaving the floor to Sarah.
Hello, and thank you, Maddalena. I'm gonna cover the most recent amending legislation. So, in line with the concern that led to the publication of the 607 amending regulation, last year on the 9th of July 2024, the amending regulation EU 2024-1860 was published, introducing 3 elements, being the extension of transition periods for IVD legacy devices. So certain IVDD legacy devices may benefit for longer transition times if certain conditions are met. And then the amending regulation allowed for a phased implementation of the mandatory use of EUDAMED modules once they are declared functional by a notice in the official journal of the European Union. And also the notification for interruption of supply, meaning that manufacturers must inform the authorities and health institutions if there is a permanent or temporary interruption in the supply of devices to avoid potential risks to patients' health. And the Commission has also published 3 Q&A, one each for every element. So you will find the hyperlinks in the slide when you will receive the slides. So talking about these elements one by one, starting from the transitional provisions for IVD legacy devices. The amending regulation extends the transition periods. So depending on the device classification and conditional to certain requirements, the transitional deadlines are pushed back to December 2027, 2028, or 2029. The amending regulation extends the validity of IVDD certificates. So depending on certain conditions, the validity of IVDD certificate is extended by law without a need for the notified body to reissue or amend the directive certificates. And it also introduced the concept of transfer of appropriate surveillance for IVDD, similarly as it happened in the 607. So it allows the transfer of appropriate surveillance for legacy devices from the directive notified body that issued the certificate to the regulation notified body if those notified bodies are different. And this must be completed and requested by the 26th of September 2025. So, as Maddalena already explained, there are some conditions that need to be fulfilled. There are some conditions that are applied to all legacy devices independently of the classification, being the continued compliance with the IVDD. There should be no significant changes to the legacy devices according to the MDCG 2022-6. And there should also be no unacceptable risks associated with the devices. And by now, so the deadline was the 26th of May 2025, all manufacturers should have implemented an IVDR compliant QMS. The difference comes to the applicable deadlines for the application written agreement and then the end of the transition period, for which the Commission has kept the staggered approach that was initially introduced with the previous amending regulation. So IVDD and certified devices and Class D self-declared devices had until the 26th of May 2025 to lodge a formal application with an IVDR notified body. And they have until the 26th of September 2025 to sign a written agreement. Also, by that date, there should be the transfer of the appropriate surveillance for legacy devices if those were certified by a notified body that it's different from the one that holds the application and the written agreement. And if all these conditions with the previous one that I mentioned are fulfilled, then the transition deadline is pushed back to December 2027. For Class C devices, the formal application should be lodged by the 26th of May and the written agreement should be signed by the 26th of September 2026. And this, together with the other conditions, will allow for the transition period to end in December 2028. And for Class B and A sterile devices, the application should be lodged by the 26th of May 2027. The written agreement should be signed by September 2027. And this way, the transition period is pushed back to December 2029. So what Maddalena just explained that applies to medical devices in terms of manufacturers' responsibilities and also notified body expectations also apply to IVDD certified devices, so and self-declared devices to some extent. So, for example, we will expect a self-declaration to be produced and the processes to maintain that self-declaration. We will also expect the manufacturers to request the continuation or the restart of the appropriate surveillance of their legacy devices to the notified bodies. But there are also some consideration to be made on the impact that some actions might have on the IVDR conformity assessment. So for IVDD certificates and Class D self-declare devices, because we are past the deadline for the application date, being the 27th of May 2025, if there will be an IVDR refusals or scope restriction or cancellation or withdrawal, then this means that the extended transition period ceases to apply for the impacted legacy devices, since the requirement is not fulfilled anymore, and there is no option for the manufacturer to lodge another application under the IVDR. Whereas for self-declared devices, if the action, so if the IVDR refusal or scope restriction or cancellation or withdrawal or IVDR application happens now, and we can take, for example, a Class C device, then the extended transitional period continues to apply, provided that the IVDR application is lodged by the 26th of May 2026 in this case, and the IVDR written agreement is signed by the 26th of September 2026. If that refusal or scope restriction, etc., happens in the future after the 27th of May 2026, for that Class C device, then the extended period, transitional period, will cease to apply, and because the IVDR application will not be lodged anymore after the 26th of May 2026. So then, in terms of the gradual introduction of EUDAMED, key will be the date when the notice of functionality of a certain module will be published on the official journal of the European Union. From that date, the regulation allows for a 6-month transition period, meaning that from the no later than 6 months after the publication of the notice of the actor module, then the economic operators must register. After the publication of the notice for the UDI device module, then manufacturers must register their regulation devices in EUDAMED before they place them on the market. No later than 6 months after the publication of the notice for the vigilance and post-market surveillance module, the manufacturers must report serious incidents and field safety corrective actions, and also submit trend reports. They will also have to submit PSURs for Class 3 devices or implantable devices, and for Class D devices. There is also a further deadline that applies for manufacturers to complete the registration of certain information. So no later than 12 months after the publication of the notice of the UDI device module, manufacturers must complete the registration of regulation devices and legacy devices, unless the same regulation device is already registered. that were placed on the market before the publication of the notice of functionality of the UDI device module, and that also continue to be placed on the market after that date. With regards of the notified body module and certificate module, once this is declared functional, then the notified body has 6 months to start uploading information relating to the MDR and IVDR applications withdrawn or refused, and also start uploading the MDR and IVDR certificates issued, including changes, amendments, and supplements, and also those certificates that are suspended, reinstated, cancelled, refused, or whose scope has been limited. The notified body has also a further deadline, being 18 months after the publication of the notice, for completing the submission of all relevant certification and associated information with the MDR and IVDR devices that are registered in EUDAMED, and also the relevant validated SSP. So this one you see is the most recent forecast that has been published by the European Commission. So looking at some dates, we can appreciate that the forecast tells us that the first notice that will be published will be for the actor modules, the UDI devices, the notified body and certificates, and market and surveillance modules. And this should be this notice should be published over the summer this year. This means that by the end of next year, manufacturers will have to mandatory register certain information. And then by the end of the 2026, both the manufacturer and the notified body will have to complete the registration of all necessary information. And you find an hyperlink to this forecast in the slides as well. So then the notification for interruption of supply had a specific date of application clarified in the amending regulation, being the 10th of January 2025. So the amending regulation tells that there should be a notification at least 6 months before it occurs, except in exceptional circumstances, if there is a permanent or temporary interruption in the supply of devices to avoid potential risks to patients' health. So manufacturers should inform the competent authority of the member state where the manufacturer is located or where the authorized representative is located, and also the economic operators, the health institutions, and the healthcare professionals to whom the manufacturer directly supplied the device. But the notification obligation also applies to economic operators. So economic operators who have received the information from the manufacturer or from another economic operator in the supply chain shall inform without undue delay any other economic operators in the downstream supply chain, and also healthcare institutions and healthcare professionals to whom they directly supply the device. The notification should be completed via a form that has been made available by the Commission on the Commission website, and it's included in the MDCG 2024-16. So, although the notified body involvement in the notification chain is limited, our involvement as notified body will be to check that the manufacturer has the processes in place to cover those requirements of Article 10A. So during the QMS audits, the notified body will check if there are the processes in place to ensure that to ensure compliance with the requirements of Article 10A. And in particular, we will be checking for processes determining foreseeable supply interruptions and discontinuation, and also for processes on the notification of applicable stakeholders. And these are the three elements, and now I will hand it over to Vishal. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, and Maddalena, both of you. So I'm going to give a quick update on what's happening in the UK in terms of the current status of legislative reform, what the proposed timelines are, and some of the post-market surveillance requirements. So if we look at the current ways of working, this links quite well with what Maddalena and Sarah have presented. So manufacturers at the moment can place devices onto the GB market using conformity assessment as per the EU MDD, AIMDD, IVDD, so if you have valid certificates. However, there are some specifics that you need to remember. So for the lower risk devices, the class 1S, class 1M, 2A, 2B, and 2B implantable wet devices, manufacturers can take on board the 2023 607 requirements and the timelines that have been addressed in Europe. So the MHRA have taken these on board. But you do require to upload an Article 120 extension confirmation to MHRA, appoint a UKRP if required, and make sure you are meeting the conditions met under 2023-607, which Madalena mentioned. In addition, from next week, the PMS requirements as per SI 2024-1368 have to be met. And then the products can be placed on the market until the 30th of June 2028, which are the timelines which are referenced in 2023-607 for these types of devices. And then when we look at the higher risk devices, so the 2B implantable non-wet devices, the class 3s, and the AIMD devices, again, similar to what we have to do for the lower risk devices, but the timelines are slightly different because it takes into account 2023-607 timelines. So you can place the devices onto the market until the 31st of December 2027, after which you will have to meet the newer requirements in the UK legislation. From an IVD perspective, this again takes on board the requirements of 2024-1860, which Sarah quite rightly went through. But for the List A, List B self-test devices, you need to upload an Article 110 extension confirmation with the MHRA when you register. Make sure that the conditions under 2024-1860 are met. Appoint a UKRP as required. And again, the PMS requirements as per statutory instrument 2024-1368 have to be met. Due to the differences in the IVD's classification, products can be placed onto the market until the 31st of December 2027. For up-classified general IVDs, it will be 31st of December 2029 or until they expire. So you've got the Class Ds can be until December 2027, Class Cs until December 2028, and the Class Bs and sterile Class As until December 2029. And then you do have the regulation. So if you have transitioned over to EU MDR and IVDR, similarly, UKRP appointed if required. You don't have to upload anything else with the MHRA apart from registering with the MHRA. You do need to meet the PMS requirements as per the statutory instrument 2024-1368. And this applies to all classifications under the MDR and IVDR. And you can place the products onto the market until 30th of June 2030 at the moment. And then we look at conformity assessment as per the current UK legislation. So we're talking about the UK MDR 2002. So for all classifications, UKRP are pointed at and identified if required, and the PMS requirements have to be met. And products can be placed onto the market until, at the moment, 30th of June 2028 and 30th of June 2030 for IVDs and medical devices, respectively. However, these transition timelines may change dependent on when new legislation comes into force and new transition timelines come into force from the MHRA. So if we look at the proposed transition timelines, so just as a summary, for UKCA marked products under the current UK legislations, there will be a 3-year transition for medical devices and 5 years for IVDs, or when the certificates expire. So at the moment, we had a date of 30th of June 2028 for the medical devices and 30th of June 2030 for the IVDs. I have put down that this is to be confirmed because we are still awaiting new legislation and new transition timelines from MHRA. For the CE mark devices under EU directives, again, it's going to be as per the EU 2023-607 and the IVD's 2024-1860 and the transition timelines in there. For the MDR and IVDR devices that are CE marked, it is going to be up to 5 years, so up until the 30th of June 2030 at the moment, but this could potentially change. And now we look at the PMS statutory instrument. So most of you may be aware the MHRA published their post-market surveillance statutory instrument, which came into law, and it actually comes into force on the 16th of June, so next Monday. So all manufacturers do need to meet the requirements of this statutory instrument. So, like I said, on the 16th of December, this regulation was passed into law by the UK government and the impact assessment began. And now what manufacturers should be doing is concluding the impact assessments, updating their QMS, updating systems and tools, creating updated device-specific PMS systems and PMS plans. And then as soon as it gets to 16th of June 2025, this is when the regulation comes into force. You need to make sure as manufacturers that compliance is required to this statutory instrument. You need to implement your PMS plans. Serious incident reporting aligns with the EU in most cases, and there is some trend reporting requirements. There have been some changes in reporting requirements for vigilance and FSCAs as well. So please do make sure you have looked at these. And ongoing things that you need to look after is for all your devices, and because this statutory instrument is for all devices placed onto the GB market, you will have to create a PSUR, which is due within 1 year from the 16th of June 2026, and a PMSR, so for the lower risk devices, it is due within 3 years of 16th of June. So what does this statutory instrument say? So the statutory instrument 2024-1368 covers the post-market surveillance requirements under the UK MDR 2002 in Great Britain. So there's a lot of requirements in there, in terms of PMS. So it's looking at the PMS system, the PMS plan, preventative corrective actions, reporting and investigation of serious incidents, like I stated, FSCAs, FSCNs, FSCAs that are outside of Great Britain, the post-market surveillance reports, the PSURs, trend reporting requirements, reports received by the Secretary of State, and the analysis of information as per Part 4A, but also retention and request of it. So there's a lot of requirements in there, and I can't go through every specific requirement, but do have a look at what the statutory instrument says. We do have an on-demand webinar as well, which we have presented externally, which you can get on a link on the BSI website. But remember, the requirements of this statutory instrument apply for all devices that are placed onto the GB market, including the CE mark devices. You need to comply to these requirements. There are some exemptions for custom-made devices. Custom-made devices are exempt for FSCAs outside of GB, post-market surveillance reports, and PSUR reports and trend reporting. They are exempt from these requirements. There is a complete exemption for specific devices, such as devices under clinical investigation, devices for performance evaluation, and devices subject to EUA, so exceptional use authorization. But for all other devices, if you are placing onto the GB market, you do need to meet the requirements of this statutory instrument. So what are the responsibilities for all the stakeholders? So if we look at the manufacturer, there's a lot of responsibilities from the manufacturer side. You need to implement the PMS system and plan, look at the periodic safety reporting depending on the classification of your devices, looking at the PMSRs, PSURs, cooperating with and provide information to the MHRA on request, retain the PMS documentation, looking at serious incidents and FSCA reporting, and looking at the trend reporting. From an approved body and UK responsible person perspective, if you are a UK responsible person, you will receive the PSUR review reports, retaining all the PMS documentation, and again, cooperating with and providing information to the MHRA as requested. There are some timelines associated with that in the statutory instrument. From an approved body perspective, so as an approved body, we will be reviewing these PSURs as required and issuing reports. So the only time the approved body is involved, if you are UKCA marking, we will review the PSURs, but as well as looking at your QMS as well. We will review your CAPA notifications, we will assess the PMS plans in the initial application, and we will continue to look at compliance to the PMS statutory instrument during surveillance audits and recertification audits. And we are required to provide information to MHRA upon request as well, so we will be providing this as required. The MHRA also has specific requirements that they need to meet as part of the statutory instrument. They will be receiving reports for serious incidents, FSCAs, trends, and monitor these manufacturers' investigations, initiating separate investigations when necessary. They'll be identifying any trends that they require, that they get from signals and any information received, and informing manufacturers. And of course, they will receive the reports from incidents from healthcare professionals and the public and forward them to manufacturers as well. So key new requirements that I just wanted to stay out. There are some specifics on preventative and corrective action that you need to notify the UKRP, AB, and MHRA, and also monitor these. Serious incident reports, these timelines are slightly different now. There's 2 days, 10 days, and 15 days, and these are defined for initial and finals in this PMS statutory instrument. There is requirements for PMSRs or PSURs, depending on the risk of the device, and these need to be updated regularly and defined, which may be reviewed by the approved body if there is one, but also the MHRA. Trend reporting is a requirement for all incidents with significant increase in severity or frequency, so make sure you are starting to trend report as well. So this gives a quick overview of what the PSUR requirements are. So you'll see for the higher risk devices, for the class 3s, the active implantables, the 2B implantables, you are required to update these annually, and they will be reviewed by an approved body if you are UKCA marking, and reviewed standalone. And these requirements are the same as the MDR and IVDR. For the 2A implantables, they are slightly different to the MDR and IVDR, and it is going to depend on how the surveillance audits are done, but they're required to be updated biannually. For the 2B non-implantable devices and the 2A devices that are non-implantable, so they are required to be updated annually and biannually, depending on the classification, but we will review them as part of surveillance if you are UKCA marking them. And these are the same requirements as per the MDR and IVDR. So for the IVDs, this is slightly different. This is a big shift compared to the EU IVDR. For the List A IVDs, List B IVDs, and the Ds and the Cs, they have to be updated annually. For the A's, List A and List B IVDs, of course, they will be reviewed by the approved body because that's the classification as per the current legislation. And for the higher risk List A devices, we will review them standalone. And for the List B devices, it really is going to depend how your surveillance activities are carried out. For the Class D and Class C IVDs, you do need to update them. It won't be reviewed by the approved body because they are CE marked, of course. They'll only be reviewed by the approved body if we are involved in the assessments and they're UKCA marked. And what's the future holding now? What's actually happening in the UK? So there was a consultation at the back end of last year, and this focused on 4 specific areas: international reliance, removal of UKCA marking, IVD reclassification, and assimilated EU law. So the MHRA have published a response to the assimilated EU law, and they have removed the revocation dates for the 4 specific EU laws that were defined. And this came into force at the end of May. The other 3 areas in terms of international reliance, removal of UKCA marking, and IVD reclassification, we are still waiting for MHRA to respond on these. But they hopefully should respond on these as part of their pre-market statutory instrument that they need to publish. They are still on track for this, and hopefully we should get some publication of the pre-market SI by the end of the year or early next year. So new legislation will come into force next year. If we look at international reliance, this was looking at, I wanted to focus on this just so manufacturers get an idea of what MHRA is looking to do. They are looking at comparative regulator countries such as Australia, Canada, EU, of course, and the USA. And depending on the classification and the routes they go down in those countries, there are some requirements that manufacturers will need to fulfill, and approved bodies may be involved as part of these reviews as well in terms of international reliance. It's not just going to be plain sailing at the moment, as based on their consultation in terms of, yes, it will just be a blanket approval, for example. The approved body will look at something, and of course the PMS statutory instrument needs to be met as well. And if we look at the future, on what the approved body thinks of the future, there's quite a key things that are going on in the MHRA and what they've published so far as part of consultation. The updated transition timelines provide some sort of breathing room to manufacturers, because it does allow manufacturers to use their CE mark devices to place devices onto the market, still that they haven't transitioned to MDR yet. However, it is relying on manufacturers meeting EU 2023-607 and 2024-1860. Remember, if you are using the directive route, significant changes would not be allowed, so manufacturers do need to look into this, but also you do still need to meet the PMS requirements. There is some clear focus on high-risk devices and innovative devices. We see this with software and AI devices as well, and the MHRA did conclude a pilot for IDAP as well as the AI airlock, which is still ongoing. So they are looking at these high-risk devices. There is going to be some sort of broad alignment with the EU MDR, IVDR, which could provide some faster implementation for manufacturers. Again, there are also some novel routes to market, like we see with IR, but they are also looking at MVSAP, as well, which would provide manufacturers an opportunity to combine assessments as long as alignment between the requirements. There's some greater efficiencies to be had from the approved body perspective if we are an EU notified body and MDSAP provider, and leveraging of other approvals may speed up some conformity assessment as well. And then, of course, like I mentioned, it is targeting innovative devices. They are looking at targeting SMEs, rare conditions, and market access for specific circumstances. So there's a lot ongoing in the UK as well as Europe. And with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. And in the last 10 minutes, I just wanted to go to the questions that we've had come through. And we've had quite a few questions. So I'd like to welcome back Madalena and Sarah to the panel. Great. Thank you, Madalena and Sarah. So it's been quite a few questions, so we will try to get through as much as possible. But apologies if we can't get through all of them from the beginning. So I guess the first question's for Sarah. Is it correct that devices falling under or the pushed back transition period can still be manufactured until the deadline of placing on the market applies, i.e. not only sold or distributed from existing inventory, but also newly manufactured accordingly to existing unchanged technical documentation? So from an IVD perspective first, Sarah.
Yes, so the devices can be manufactured and placed on the market if all the requirements that we went through are fulfilled until the end of the transition period. And of course, again, it's important that all the requirements are fulfilled. If one of the requirements is not fulfilled for any reason, some we went through the presentation, there should be some actions taken on the placing of the device on the market.
Great, and I'm assuming that also applies to MDR as well, in a similar way.
And if I may add, Vishal, the 607 removed the sell-off period. So after the transition ends, those devices that the question was referring to, those in stock and in the supply chain, can still be distributed in Europe if they have been placed on the market.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. Now I'm going to go to Madalena. There's an interesting question that has come up. Does the EU MDR plan any other amendments or significant changes in the future for specifically Class 2A devices? But I'd like to add to that, are they proposing any other amendments, which I know you'll have a lot to say about. But second part of the question is also when ISO 15223-1 Amendment 2025 will be harmonized on EU regulations to the change EC rep to EU rep, what are the timelines for removing this? So an interesting question about changes and amendments to the EU MDR, but also about harmonized standards. So Maddalena.
Yeah, thank you. So there are no specific planned amendments that we are aware of that are specifically impacting Class 2A devices. But as Vishal was anticipating, there is a targeted evaluation of the MDR and IVDR ongoing, which aims at assessing the effectiveness of these regulations. So it aims at identifying any challenges faced by the stakeholders and exploring potential areas for improvement. And so there will be some pieces of law that will come out as an outcome of these targeted evaluation. So something will come, but not specifically for Class 2A, just to be clear. And as per the harmonization of the ISO 15223, there are currently no timelines for the harmonization itself. And once that's published, usually there is a transitional period of time specified on the CEN website. Usually it's 3 years, but it might depend. And there might also be the cases where the standard itself specifies a transition period. So we cannot answer to this question at this point in time specifically.
Okay, thank you, Maddalena. Okay, next question I have is actually to do with the UK, so I'll answer this. But does this PSUR have to be specific for the UK, or can this be leveraged from the EU MDR, IVDR, PSUR? The answer to that is yes, you can use your EU PSUR. However, you do need to make clear in there how the UK requirements have been met. You still need to look at the requirements of the PMSSI. There are some specifics that are required by the MHRA and approved bodies if you're a UKCA mod for the UK requirements, and you can make them clear in the same PSUR. As an approved body, we will try to combine reviews of these PSURs as well with the EU MDR, IVDR PSURs, so you won't have two separate reviews. Okay, and then I have time for one last question, which I'm going to ask Maddalena. If an MDR application was lodged in May 2024, what is the last date that a manufacturer can submit their technical documentation for review?
So the European Commission Q&A clarified that at the point of application under MDR, manufacturers should have shared a plan for submission of the MDR technical documentation. So that's the plan you should aim at complying with. But there is no legislative deadline. So the MDR doesn't, and the FDR as well, they do not have a specific deadline for when you have to submit technical documentation, but you have to consider the what's the applicable end date of the transitional timeline for your legacy devices, and you should also look at the average time that is needed to obtain an MDR or IVDR certificate, and those timelines are published in the European dashboard, Commission dashboard that I share the link within the slides. So you will need to carefully plan when you're specific for yourself, for your device, what you consider being the maximum timeline in order for you to be pretty confident that you can obtain the MDR or IVDR certificate on time. But please stick to the submission plan that you agreed with your notified body, because it will make the process easier for everyone.
Great. No, thank you, Maddalena. And with that, I just wanted to make some. I just wanted to thank Maddalena and Sarah first, for being on the panel today and for some great presentations. And just some closing remarks, I think, based on what's been presented today. I think from an EU perspective, I think the key takeaway here is don't delay your applications or submissions to the notified body. With the MDR side, you should have already sign the 2023-607 with your notified body and hopefully be submitting those. And from a IVD perspective, don't forget the timelines. So the timelines are fast approaching for engaging with your notified body. So make sure you are engaging with them and signing any applications up. But overall, it's, please submit to your notified body your application so we can review them. So there's no delay in market access. And from the UK perspective, I'd just like to say, the biggest thing is next week, Monday, the 16th of June, the PMS statutory instrument comes into force. So please make sure as a manufacturer, you are starting to meet the requirements of that statutory instrument. Because if you do have an approved body involved, we will be looking at those requirements. And I'm sure also the MHRA will. So I just wanted to thank everyone and also let everyone know that Healthcare Week is still ongoing and we've had a great past this is the third day, so it's 3 days, and we've still got 2 more days to go. Tomorrow there is a presentation on circularity in healthcare, and on Friday there'll be an interesting presentation on the power of in silico trials. So harnessing AI and innovation, how can it impact healthcare? So thank you everyone, and just a reminder that you will receive a survey to feedback about the webinar, as well as you will get the link to the recording for this webinar. Thank you everyone.
Thank you.